So we finally have GNS3 up and running. We've got it loaded. It's ready to go to start building our virtual lab. So let's go ahead and get going with that. So in these next set of videos, I'm going to actually be combining several things at once. I'm going to be slowly building a lab, and at the same time, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what the various icons are and what the toolbars are surrounding the outer periphery or the outside of your GNS GUI. So let's get started with that. So let's go ahead and open up GNS3. And like we saw previously, the first thing it's going to do is ask us to name this particular project. And that's whatever you want. You could even leave it as untitled if you wish. I'm just going to say test CCNA. I'll just say CCNA Project 1. There we go. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we are looking at here, what these various things are on the screen. So starting with this area right here, this large white space, basically we call this the workspace. So this is where your various routers and stuff are going to end up going. They're connected to each other, and your switches and things like that. And so this is where you're going to create your topology, is in the workspace. Now the next thing I want to focus on is this toolbar right here on the left. This is called the devices toolbar, and from here, like it sounds, you get to select the various devices that you want. Now the devices that are going to be available here are dependent on a couple of things. Number one, depends on what iOS software you have put in here. Now at minimum, you should have something in the router section. I mean, even if you have just one flavor of Cisco iOS software, it's going to be router software because GNS3 doesn't support switching software. It only supports router software. So you'll have something in the router section. So let's go ahead and open up this and see what it looks like. So if I go ahead and click on this, it shows me that right now I have a single router, because I should say a single platform of router available to me, because right now all I loaded in was a 3725 iOS image. If for some reason I want more, I would just go up to Edit, Preferences, and then on my left section here under Dynamips, I'd click on iOS routers and I'd say New, and then I would locate the new image I want to insert, which in this case is stored in my hard drive. Maybe I want a 7200 series iOS, so I'd put that in there. And you should always decompress it, that way your routers will start much more quickly. You can just leave the name the same, and this is just like we talked about earlier. Make sure the memory, that actually is the appropriate amount of memory, 512 megs. And that's one of the downsides of using the 7200 series. They eat up a gob of memory. You can see that just running two of those things is going to eat up 1 gig. And then you populate your slots. So I'll just put another couple of fast Ethernets in there, and I'll put a 8-port serial card, and that's all I'm going to do for now. And then select your idle PC. And this is all stuff that we saw earlier in the previous videos. All I'm doing right now is showing you what you need to do if you want to get another model of router available to you in the router's devices. So this shouldn't take too long. And there we go. Now we have an idle PC value that's been found. So I can hit that and finish. And now when I hit apply and OK, now if I go back to the router section, I've got two different flavors of router. Now remember what I told you earlier, that ideally when you create your topologies, if you can, just stick with one flavor of router. For example, in this particular topology here, if I drop in a couple of 3725s and then maybe a 7200, I'm now going to be eating up a lot more memory. Now these routers right now are not turned on, they're not powered on, but once they are turned on, it's going to consume more memory because I'm going to have a 7200 series image running at the same time as a 3725 image. It'd be a lot easier if I just get rid of my 7200 and just keep my topology purely made of all the same model, 3725s. That will consume less memory on my laptop. So you can see here, I've shown you basically, here's the routers, you just basically drag and drop them into your topology. Now one thing that's kind of nice about this, as you've seen, I've been dragging them individually one at a time. A nice little sort of shortcut, because I'm guessing you're probably going to want to make a topology that's more than one router, is, and what I'm doing here is I'm just right-clicking on the router to get all of these various options, is when you drag your router in, before you let go of your mouse, on your keyboard, press your Shift key, and then while you're pressing Shift, let go of your mouse. And now it actually prompts you, how many routers do you want to drop? So instead of just dropping one, if I know that my topology is going to have 5 routers, I can just put 5 here. And bam, there they are. There's all 5 routers. So that is the routers devices, or the router nodes, because remember, everything on this section here on the left is called a node. And the next one down is the switching nodes. And you can see here that GNS3 by default provides you an ATM switch. Now this is a real basic ATM switch. This is not running Cisco iOS. But if you want to drag and drop some routers here that have some ATM interfaces, well, you're going to need an ATM switch to connect them. And so here's a real easy way to do that. You also have an Ethernet hub. You have an Ethernet switch. So these first 3 here, these go by the name of built-in nodes because you don't need any special iOS for these. They are built into GNS3 as built-in nodes. And then the last one also is a built-in node, the frame relay switch. That's also in there. And I'll just go ahead and drop in, for example, the Ethernet switch. We'll talk more about switching later on, but if I right-click that, you can see there's no option in here to open a command line, to open a console, because there is no command line in this. In this one, I would just hit Configure. And for example, here I could select, my particular interfaces and whether I want them to be access ports, 802.1q, what VLAN I want them to be in, and so on and so forth. And we'll get into more of that later on when we get into the switching section. Now, the one switching node in here that is not a built-in node is the EtherSwitch router. This is here because when I imported my 3725 iOS image, I clicked on that little box that said, this is an EtherSwitch router. And that automatically told this router, hey, you need to have the Ethernet switching module built in. So this is a 3725, but it's got that Ethernet switching module built in. So if I want to practice some actual Cisco iOS commands that relate to switching, this is the guy I would want to drag and drop into my topology. So those are all your switches. The next node down is your PC type node, and you've actually got 3 of these. So let me start with the bottom one. The virtual PC is most likely the one that you're going to use when you first get started with GNS3. This is the one you're going to use. And like I mentioned in previous videos, this virtual PC here allows you to, if I open up the console of this, actually the console won't work right now because it's not turned on, but if it was on, I open up the console, it would let me start UDP streams, TCP streams, and we'll get all into that when I talk about how we actually use these PCs. Now you might be wondering to yourself, well, what's the difference between this virtual PC and this other node I see up here called the host node? Well, they're actually extremely different from each other. Actually, the host node and the cloud node are exactly the same thing. They're just 2 different representations for something. I'll talk more about this later, but let me just give you a preview real quickly. So we know that GNS3 is running as an application inside of your laptop. And presumably, your laptop has some sort of real network interface card, a wired Ethernet card, or at minimum, a Wi-Fi NIC. Well, sometimes you might have a desire to actually connect your GNS3 virtual topology to the real outside world. And this is where you would use either the cloud node or the host node to do that. Both of them do the exact same thing when you use those. So for example, if I bring in the cloud node here, one of the things I would have to do with this, I'm not going to go into the details right now, but when you right click on that, one of the things you would do is within that cloud node, you would tell it what network interface card I want to use. Like in my particular laptop, I have both a wired Ethernet and a Wi-Fi NIC. So I could select one of those. I could go into that cloud node and say, okay, cloud, you are actually going to connect to my wired Ethernet NIC card. And then if I connect one of those routers to that cloud, guess what? That router now actually has access to whatever is connected to my wired NIC. So if my wired NIC is connected to a real physical switch sitting on the desk right next to me, or a real physical router on the desk right next to me, that physical device will now be able to talk to my virtual router, my emulated router, because they're both connected via this cloud. And the cloud is that node that actually connects the virtual topology with my actual physical NIC card. The cloud could also connect to your Wi-Fi NIC card as well. Now you might be wondering, well, if cloud and the host node are both exactly the same thing, why would I use one or the other? What's the difference? It really is just for you to keep your topology sort of in your mind. For example, let's say that connected to my laptop, connected to my Ethernet cable right here on my laptop, I actually had a real physical Windows server right here, running like, like a Windows R8 server, a Windows 2000 server, or something like that. Because I was going to use that server for doing like AAA. Maybe I want to be a Radius server. Maybe I want to configure it as a domain server, or as a, install Apache on there so I could browse to it, or something like that. And I want to connect my GNS3 virtual topology to that one physical server. Well, in my topology, it would probably make more sense then for me to connect my router to the host. Because after all, my physical laptop, the cable is connecting to one thing, a host device, one physical server. I could just as easily have used the cloud icon as well, because they both do the same thing. But where I would probably use the cloud is, as you get more advanced with some of your switching labs, especially when you get to the CCNP level, you'll realize that a lot of the switching commands that you need to know for the CCNP and for the CCIE, unfortunately, require either a real physical switch or L2 IOU. And even L2 IOU doesn't have all the commands that real physical switches do. So for a lot of that stuff, you're going to need a real physical switch. So let's say I had a little rack here. Let's say I had 3 physical switches that I purchased from Cisco or from eBay or from someplace, 3 physical switches. And I want to connect those 3 physical switches into my GNS3 topology. Well, once again, I would have to connect one of them physically to the NIC card on my laptop, and then I would probably use the cloud node. Because in this particular case, just to think of it in my mind, well, my GNS3 environment is not really just connecting to one thing, it's connecting to 3 things, 3 switches. So it makes more sense for me to use the cloud. But really, they both do exactly the same thing. They're built-in nodes that allow you to connect your GNS3 environment to something physically connected to your laptop. And that's it. So that's what they are. So let's go ahead and get rid of those for a moment. Delete and delete. And then if we keep on going down, this one here, I don't have anything in this. So this one says security devices. So this is for more advanced users. In order to do security devices, now I'd have to have some virtual machines and stuff in order to do like a Cisco ASA or a PIX or something like that. But in my case, I don't have any of that kind of stuff, so there's nothing showing up here. And then this 5th one down basically shows you everything. So actually you can just click on that and it'll show you everything you have if you just want to get a view of all the nodes. The last one is actually not displaying any node. This last one, if you can see it, as I hover my mouse over it, it says add a link. If I click on that, that's actually what I use to add links between my devices. So for example, let me go ahead and unclick it. Let's say I want to connect these routers together, and let's say I want to connect R1 and R2 via Ethernet. So I click my link tool, and now notice that my cursor turns into like a plus sign, sort of like a, I don't even know how to describe that, but basically you just click on one of your devices like my router, and now it shows me all the interfaces in that router. So I say, all right, well I want to select Fast Ethernet 00, and now I'm creating a link. I go up and click the other router, and I want to connect him to Fast Ethernet 00. So now I have just created a link between these 2 routers. Oh, between router 2 and router 4, I want to connect them via serial. So I click on him, serial 20, connecting to serial 20. And as long as this link is selected, notice it's got the little sort of stop sign there, as long as that's depressed, anytime I click on a device, it'll allow me to connect links from that device to another device. And then once I'm done, I just go back to the link button again, press it, and deselect it. So just to recap this section, I'm going to wrap up this video. So far what we've talked about is the workspace, and this is where I'm actually going to start working with my devices. This is where you drag and drop everything, and this is where you form your topology. And if I saved my project right now, I'll just go ahead and do that. File, Save Project. And remember what I named it? CCNA Project 1. Well, now if I go into my folder where my projects are located, let's go ahead and do that. C drive, users, my name, GNS3, projects, and there it is, CCNA Project 1. If I double click that, here's the latest screenshot. So there's the PNG image of what I've created so far. Now notice, what if let's go ahead and go back to this. What if I move this around a little bit? Like that. Okay, is that automatically going to update that PNG image? Well, let's refresh this. Refresh, open it up. Nope, it didn't. So this PNG is only going to be updated if I go to File, Save Project. Then it will take a new image of whatever this is currently looking at in the workspace. So we've talked about the workspace, and we've talked about the device toolbar and what each of these buttons on the device toolbar represent. So in the next video, I'm going to go into some of these other areas of the GNS3 application and the various different parts of the screen, and we'll talk about what they mean.